So that bit there was entirely my fault on account of the fact that Abigail, who's our indefatigable events organizer, who's been sorting all of these things with remarkable skill and keeping me to time and to my task, is currently seated in the gallery at the back because as we come back into this final session, we are joined today by two speakers from the Princeton University Preparatory program, Dr. Jason Klugman and Anna Cabrera. Dr. Klugman is the Senior Director, College Preparation Initiatives and Director, Princeton University Preparatory Program. He joined Princeton in 2004 to lead PUPP and also served as a lecturer and program associate in Princeton's program in teacher preparation from 2004 to 2017. And Anna Cabrera is the Assistant Director for Family Engagement in PUPP. She was recently promoted to become the inaugural Assistant Director of Family Engagement within the College Preparations Initiative Unit in the Emma Bloomsburg Center for Access and Opportunity at Princeton University. And I'm absolutely delighted that they are here today at a time that is the afternoon for us, but is very much morning in America for them. So very, very happy to welcome them here.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you to the UK Office of Students for inviting us today. I believe our slides are on the screen. Is that true?
Yes.
Are we ready with our slides? I'm going to assume that they are there. Fantastic. So the Princeton University Preparatory Program is a highly engaged holistic college preparation initiative that Princeton started back in 2001. And typically when Anna and I present together about PUPP, we're working with our community, our scholars, and our families. And I'm speaking in English and Anna is speaking in Spanish and being much more efficient with her words than I am. But today we'll both be presenting to you in English. We can go to the next slide. The history of PUPP, it was founded after the university was looking in the late 90s at the pathway of first generation and lower income students to Princeton. Were they in the applicant pool? Where were they? What could we do about their experience in the process? And one of the things that happened at that time at Princeton is that they decided to eliminate student loans as part of the process of paying for college. In the US, our system is very complex. There are public institutions and private institutions. The costs vary across the sectors. And Princeton is one of the most expensive institutions, but also one of the wealthiest. So it's able to provide the most generous financial aid. But what we understood was that financial aid alone doesn't make the difference for first generation low income students. If they don't have the advising, if they don't have the proper coursework, if they don't have the proper preparation, they're not even going to be in the applicant pool. And if they are applying to places like Princeton, their applications won't rise to the top. That's what we found. Another big thing that happened in the last 2 decades is that we've had a lot of research on first generation low income students and this process of what's called undermatching, where high achieving students from low income or diverse backgrounds, underrepresented communities are not applying or were not applying to highly selective colleges where they would be, where they would really be successful and have the kind of outcomes that we would want, that we would expect from them. So to try to address undermatching, there have been a lot of efforts across the US, some dating as far back as 1965 with the founding of the Upward Bound programs from the federal government, and then newer initiatives like PUPP that help support students to consider themselves as potential candidates for success at places like Princeton. We're in a really interesting space at Princeton. We were started in Princeton's program in teacher preparation, and then we've moved now to our Emma Bloomsburg Center for Access and Opportunity. And we work alongside a range of outreach initiatives, both at the university, regionally, and nationally, programs connected to the National College Attainment Network, the National Partnership for Educational Access. And we try to be good colleagues. We are a small program working very locally to address this issue of undermatching and preparing students from low-income backgrounds for places like Princeton. we'll go to the next slide. I just wanted to share a little bit more about our context. I know the session was labeled Lessons from the United States. We are a tiny little part of the higher education sector in America. You see the large map of the United States with the very small note of the state of New Jersey. Our population centers really are on the coast in America. But within New Jersey, our county where we're located, Mercer County, is about 45 miles from Philadelphia and about 60 miles from New York City, kind of right in the middle. What's interesting about our county, Mercer County, is that our state capital is Trenton. And then the distance between Trenton and Princeton is about 16 kilometers. But the difference in community is striking. It's pretty much worlds away. Trenton as a community, over 30% of the population in Trenton lives under our federal poverty line. The high school is one of the most disadvantaged schools in the state. And each community that we serve kind of has its own school district and its own high school. So there are 5 different districts that we work with, 5 different communities. 3 of those communities border Trenton. And as you come from Trenton to Princeton, you see the difference in statistics and communities. So in Trenton, most of the students are eligible for free or reduced lunch. That is an indicator of poverty or lack of wealth in the community. And then when you get to Princeton, only 8% of students at Princeton High School are eligible for free and reduced lunch. Trenton High School is incredibly diverse with a growing immigrant population from Central America. Princeton as a high school is still majority white, and Asian is the next largest represented ethnic group in the high school. So it's a really interesting collection of schools that we work with. And we've developed deep relationships with all of these schools over the 22 years or so that we've been working with them. And we can go to the next slide, and I'll toss it to Anna to talk a little bit more about our local and highly engaged perspective.
So fortunately, our team is all from the community, and we all have relevant experience as educators. So we're able to maintain a close relationship with our school officials. We're following trends among students, state regulation, testing, and of course, college admissions. We work whenever possible to share information and opportunities with our local schools and our partners. PUPP benefited from its placement in teacher preparation. As Dr. Klugman mentioned, we were there for 15 years, and PUPP team members were also supervising student teachers who were completing practicum hours at the partner schools. Currently, we are supporting the development of programs for middle school students in the Trenton area as the district launches a restructuring plan to open 5 local schools. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about recruitment. In collaboration with our local schools, we identify potential candidates for our application and selection process. Recruitment is eased a little bit by our brand passed along from the university, as well as our track record, which creates interest in the program. We usually host meetings at partner schools with potential candidates from the 9th grade, and having scholars help during those presentations, as well as having team members who are alumni, helps garner interest and reduce anxiety about the program and its commitments. Once the invitation to apply letter is sent out, we host parent and student information sessions at the local schools, and we work with counselors and teachers to encourage the students to apply. The economic cutoff for families is, our economic cutoff for the families is more than the amount of family income that is currently used to identify students for federal college grants, such as the Pell Grant, and for state support programs, such as the Educational Opportunity Fund. But countrywide, our cutoff is lower than the country median income. There's a broad economic disparity across the country, and just within our partner schools, as Dr. Klugman mentioned, the disparity between Trenton and Princeton, although they're only 16 kilometers apart, is a big one. Next slide. Our selection process mirrors the college application process in the United States. So we have a robust application that the students must fill out. We encourage them to do it themselves and not get help from their parents. We also have an application essay portion that they have about 26 hours to complete now. We used to do it in person, but because of COVID, we started doing it online, which we found was a lot easier. We also request that the students get teacher recommendations. So we ask that they get a recommendation from one of their core classes. We have interviews and analysis of family background and financial resources. So we're looking for lower income, first generation students. COVID innovation was a video interview, which we found it was kind of good, but it was also kind of long. So some of our students would submit 24-minute videos, and we had between 100 and 120 applications to view. So that was a lot. So this spring, we're requiring a shorter video, and we're offering a group dynamic interview. So we're gonna have our candidates on campus, and we're gonna have activity-based events for them so that we can observe them. We have about, I think, 24 volunteers that are gonna help facilitate that, and it's gonna be at Princeton. For most of the students, it's gonna be their first time on a college campus and their first time in Princeton. Ultimately, out of 100 to 120 applications, we select a cohort of 24 scholars. So it's a competitive process, and we wish that we could have more spaces, but for now we're limited to the 24. Next slide.
So this is just a photo from a couple of years ago of our scholars at the end of our summer institute, the research symposium. 24 a year, there's a little bit of attrition. So we currently have 69 scholars in the program and over 425 alumni who are out in the world, 3 of whom, including Mrs. Cabrera, who are working for us in the program. Let's go to the next slide, which is really the full PUPP experience. And I know this slide is a lot. I know the presentation will be available for everyone to review, and we're also always available to answer questions and talk more about our work. But this really is a comprehensive experience. The PUPP experience isn't just one summer on campus or a workshop on the college process, which is very complicated in the United States. But it is a multi-year intensive process. The program is offered at no cost to the students who participate. It's really an opportunity cost. The students can actually earn a stipend every summer through their participation. It's a small stipend, but it does, particularly for the younger students who may be thinking about getting a job and working, the stipend helps alleviate some of that. We also provide all of the supports that scholars would need to be successful. So that includes a graphing calculator, a Chromebook, their backpacks, their transportation to campus every day, all of their books, all of their meals, everything is covered with the program. So we start in the spring of grade 9. We're in this process right now. We have about 84 students still in our recruitment process. We started with about 130. We're down to about 84 now. Once we select the cohort, we'll do a 2-night orientation, a program with the scholars and their parents. We'll sign a contract with them that goes through our handbook and really states our commitment. So I sign that contract, the scholar signs the contract, and a parent signs the contract. And you'll see each summer they come to Princeton, we do a retreat for 2 nights, and then the program is non-residential. So the students will take a bus every day. They'll take courses in writing, literature, art, math, science. We have a college prep track. So the first summer, that course is personal development. The second summer, we do test prep for the ACT, which is one of our admissions tests here in the US. And then their third summer, a college admissions 101 course that really walks them through identifying a list of schools to apply to, understanding the common application, and then thinking about the transition to college, what they'll need in order to be successful. And many of our students end up attending these predominantly and historically white and wealthy institutions like Princeton. And there's a significant culture shock and gap for our students if they're coming from Trenton or Ewing and heading up to Middlebury College or Dartmouth College in Vermont, or heading out to Rice University in Houston. So we try to work with them to imagine those transitions into the university setting. And then you'll see during the academic year, each academic year, there's weekly engagement, there are Saturday workshops, there are trips to cultural institutions. We take advantage of local and regional theater to expand our scholars' sense of the world around them. We really want to get them out of the neighborhood zone and into the world. And then once they become college students, there is alumni engagement. So we have an alumni associate who's a recent college graduate from our program who works to support our scholars in their lives and livelihood through college and beyond. We'll go to the next slide. Just some quick photos of scholars on campus. You can kind of see, we're in these classrooms taking advantage. This is, of course, a couple of summers ago. We were, if you go to the next slide, there's some photos of us out in the world. The group photo at Swarthmore College, which is one of our very prestigious small liberal arts colleges here in the Philadelphia area. And of course, we were on Zoom for 2 summers. So we took full advantage of the technology as best we could to keep the scholars going. Moving to the next slide, thinking about outcomes, we do have some indications of how students are doing throughout their high school career. We do follow their academic progress. We receive their regular report cards. When they head off to college, there is a way for us to check through a national database in terms of understanding every semester that they're enrolled toward a degree. And so we can crunch those numbers and look at that data. One of the important things, we do, hope that all of we work toward 100% admission and matriculation to a 4-year college. It is the case that every now and then a student, their best option is our local community college, which is a 2-year degree. And then we will continue to work with them as they transfer to a 4-year institution. One of the key notes that we're looking for is that we want our scholars attending these highly selective colleges that have a significant amount of wealth and resources to support our scholars. So we're thinking about that match being a correct match. Our scholars are earning degrees. About 75% have earned a degree in 4 to 6 years. That might seem low, but for low-income Americans who go off to college, their peer group, only 11% are earning college degrees in 4 to 6 years. So that data is really poor in the US higher education sector. 9 out of 10 first-generation low-income students do not complete college, and we're way up at 75%. And then we have folks who are pursuing advanced degrees. So we have folks who are practicing attorneys, doctors, folks with master's degrees in social work and all sorts of other fields, which is phenomenal. If we go to the next slide, and again, there's a lot on here. This is just the range and variation of schools where our scholars attend. And you might see names that you recognize like Cornell or Dartmouth or Harvard. A lot of the smaller liberal arts colleges like Trinity or Middlebury or Bryn Mawr are really places that we target for our scholars. These small institutions often have, again, that wealth of resources and support to make sure that our scholars are able to finish college. If we go to the next slide, again, just a quick image of some of our scholars. On the bottom, Eric V was our first student to head off to Harvard. There's a little bit of rivalry between Princeton and Harvard, so we were excited for Eric taking that leap to Cambridge, Massachusetts. In that same year, his fellow cohort member, Marion, headed off to Middlebury College with 4 other PUPP scholars. They were all admitted early decision, which is really wonderful for them. If we go to the next slide, I'll just talk briefly. I mentioned, you heard mention of the Emma Bloomberg Center for Access and Opportunity at Princeton. That is a new center at Princeton that brings together all of our supports and initiatives for first generation and low income students. And we think about them in an arc of to, through, and beyond college. So we're the to side, the college access side. We also do the through and beyond, but we have colleagues on campus that are dedicated to the first generation low-income students that are at Princeton's campus. And they run our Freshman Scholars Institute and our Scholars Institute Fellows Program. And we work to collaborate with them. So whatever experience we're providing for our students at Princeton, the Princeton undergraduates who didn't come through PUPP, but are first generation low income, we're trying to think about our experiences with the PUPP scholars through high school and how we can inform the work of our colleagues and offer whatever opportunities that they're offering as best we can to our students. We also lead a collaboration among local college preparation initiatives. Most of these are community-based organizations through the Greater Trenton College Access Network. And if we go to the next slide, I'll let Anna talk a little bit about our newest area of development, which is our family engagement space.
Thank you. I know that we're over time, so I'm going to be mindful of that. I just wanted to share a little bit about my journey and how family engagement came to be at PUPP. I was fortunate enough to be part of the very first PUPP class. We always say that we were the guinea pigs of PUPP. So a lot has happened and a lot has changed. And one of those innovations is family engagement. And with my experience as a PUPP scholar, then going off to college and being a first generation student, being a mother who has a 16-year-old at a local high school that we serve, and running my own business and being an active community member, it was very apparent that we needed that extra family engagement and support within PUPP, because we were supporting the scholars, but what we were finding was that a lot of these families relied on their scholars for things such as translation, help making appointments. A lot of these families don't speak English, so they would call their students anytime that there was a crisis. And this was really hard on the students that we were serving, on our scholars. So there was a need to give that additional support to families. And it's really nice for me to kind of come full circle and be able to support those families by providing resources. Sometimes all they need is to be heard and to be, for their fears to be taken into consideration, their anxieties. And so this area of work is really close to my heart. And I'm really excited that PUPP was able to give me the opportunity to come back and serve the communities and the families that PUPP supports. I don't know if you have any last remarks, Dr.
We'll just go to the last slide, and again, please, if folks have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. One of the wonderful things again about Anna's role with our work is that she'll be supporting both our PUPP scholars and families, but because we're in a center more deeply connected with the university, Anna's going to start building out curriculum for the parents of our first gen students that are coming to Princeton from across the country. And we're really trying to work on that family piece as our next level of innovation and contribution to the field. So again, thank you so much for giving us this moment. And we hope that the conference is insightful and motivating and inspiring for all of you.
Thank you. I think the powerful messages of sustained, meaningful interactions for young people before, through, and beyond higher education are of fundamental importance here as much as in the United States. So thank you very much to our colleagues from America. I'd now like to invite the speakers for our final panel to join us on the stage. So our final session today will be myth-busting, how can we support schools? And that will be chaired by Natalie Pereira, who is boldly leading the speakers onto the stage at the moment. She will introduce the speakers themselves, but I will just say that Natalie is the Chief Executive of the Education Policy Institute, an independent research institute which she co-founded in 2016. And even amidst a glittering array of education policy experts that I've had the chance to work with and indeed are here today, Natalie is one of the wisest and most insightful about the demands and challenges of genuinely building and ensuring equality of opportunity for all young people. And I'm very much looking forward to the session. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you so much, and thanks for having me. We've got a great panel lined up for you this afternoon. I know it's the last session of what I hear has been a really fantastic day, so please keep your energy levels up for this last panel discussion. So, just to introduce the panel first, to my far left we have Sally Burtonshaw, who is the Senior Policy and Advocacy Officer at London Higher. London Higher represents over 40 London universities and higher education colleges. And previously, Sally has worked on access and participation at the Brilliant Club. And Sally has just submitted her ESRC-funded PhD on the relationship between school and universities in supporting progression to HE. So well done, Sally, on getting over that threshold. Thank you. And before moving to London, Sally was responsible for progression to higher education in Hartlepool. And at that time, she created and implemented a whole institution approach to university progression. To my immediate left, we have John Laramie, CBE. John is Principal and Chief Executive of Exeter College and has been since the beginning of 2016. Prior to that, he was Vice Principal at the college. John was also the Founding Director of the Ted Ragg Marty Academy Trust and a Founding Chair of the Exeter Specialist Mathematics School. In 2018, John became a Non-Executive Director of Pearson Education Limited, and in 2019 he became a Director of the Heart of the Southwest Local Enterprise Partnership. To my immediate right, we have Matt Jones, OBE. I can't say all your titles every time, so I'm just going to refer to you by your first name because you're so esteemed, you'll be here all day. Matt was appointed as Principal of Arc Globe Academy in 2012, which is an all-through academy for 3 to 18-year-olds. And in 2019, he was appointed as Executive Principal of Evelyn Grace Academy, a secondary school in South London. In 2018, Matt founded the head teacher-led charity, the Elephant Group, which aims to ensure fair access for non-selective state school students into the UK's top third universities. And last but certainly not least, we have Professor Sean McNamara, who is Principal and CEO of the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts. He was previously head of the Guildford School of Acting at the University of Surrey. Sean is also chair of the UK's professional body for conservatoire training, the Federation of Drama Schools, and is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. So welcome to this esteemed panel. What we'll do for this discussion, I'm going to kick off with all the panel members for the first question, and then we'll come to the audience here and then online via our gallery for follow-up questions. So, first question from the chair is, has the education sector moved the conversations sufficiently from aspiration raising to attainment raising? And we'll start with you, Sally.
Thanks, Natalie. It's great to be here today. I think in terms of aspiration and attainment, it's something we've talked about this morning. I think it underpins a lot of the discussions that are happening in the sector at the moment. I'm going to put it out there and say hard no, because in terms of raising aspirations and the rhetoric around it, we know from the research that there is no real place for this discussion, and that we need to be moving much more to a model of looking at the structural barriers to progression to HE, and also that raising of expectations and the meeting of aspirations, which we know are already high, in order to support young people to progress to HE and to other destinations. So I would say that we need to be continuing to focus on that move away from raising aspirations and much more towards looking at the structural barriers underpinning that.
Thank you. John, do you agree?
Yeah, I do. I think that, my example for this is if you go to Exeter College or another school and you study A-level geography, you study the same curriculum that you might study if you went to Eton as well. So the one difference is actually the aspiration building that might go on, the debating clubs, modern United Nations. So I think for state providers in particular, I think we have a responsibility to really try and help that aspiration. And my favourite example of this was a young man whose dad drove a bus and lived in a little town in North Devon and ended up going to Oxford, which was great, and then went and did a year at MIT, and then came and did his doctorate at Cambridge, and actually now works in a university. And I think, for me, that's a great example of when we get it right in terms of building aspiration, but quite often I don't think we do get it right, so I agree with Sally's point.
Thank you. Matt?
It'd be slightly controversial and disagree a touch, which certainly aspiration ostensibly could be perceived to be something we talk about and do well, but it's a complex mix of student competence, confidence, culture and motivation, and they all sit below the aspiration bubble, which also impacts on attainment, those things, confidence. And so we need to continue to work on those aspects that sit below that high level aspiration title and make sure that we are engaging with students around the school culture, the community culture and motivation. And the key thing I look at when I assess this nationally, the Elephant Group, the charity that I chair, works with schools in the North East, Yorkshire, London and the East Midlands. And there is a very different type of messaging going in locally in the community, in the schools, around what they should be doing next. So I don't think that aspiration has been nailed. And by definition, if you look at the students from London who are on free school meals, they access top selective universities at the same rate as non-free school meal students in other regions in the country. So see, we've still got a long way to go. Having said that, obviously a key barrier to whether you access the top university or not is the quality of the education you receive and therefore the grades you achieve.
Absolutely. And Sean, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I would agree with many of the points already raised, and I think Sally just said it's about where the space is to have this conversation as well, and actually about making practical interventions in order to, I think, ensure that aspiration and attainment shouldn't be something which are divisible or separate. It's how do they actually become a holistic part of the education journey. And so it's about, I think, moving from that sense of what is the intangible to the tangible. And I think at the moment we're still some way off. And I think, as Matt just said as well, regionally, I think we see a lot of disparities. You know, my own institution in the Northwest, I think, probably has a very different set of aspirations, perhaps, to maybe institutions in other parts of the United Kingdom. So I think, again, it's about that sort of that evening and that sort of rebalancing as well.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to audience questions now. If you're asking a question, can you tell us briefly your name and your organisation? And if you're directing your question to any particular panel member. So we've got a lady in the middle here, please.
Hi, I'm Claire. My pronouns are she, her. I'm from Ambitious About Autism. We run an employability programme for autistic young people. I think my question, I'm really interested that you mentioned structural change, Sally. I've been waiting for somebody to say that all day. Recently research says that 1 in 56 children are autistic. We know that 60% of children that are autistic get off-rolled from education. We know that the employability outcomes, particularly for autistic graduates, they have the worst employability outcomes across all disabled categories, all employment types, all qualification levels. And they're almost like a hidden group, and I'm pretty sure there's probably young carers, other groups that are also hidden, and this will affect their attainment. If they're missing years and years of school and they experience significant mental health problems, this is going to impact their attainment. So the interventions and the programmes, how will they get over that barrier of having to have a certain level of education, despite probably having the skills and talent to be able to achieve in higher education? Thank you.
Great, thanks, Claire. Matt, I might come to you first as a secondary leader. What adjustments or considerations need to be made for children with SEND and particularly with autism?
So we've got to recognise that an individual programme in isolation isn't going to meet the needs of any particular group of students who may face challenges, particularly post-COVID. Well, we're not quite post-COVID, let's be clear about that. During COVID, schools have many competing priorities, especially around student well-being, mental health, and other gaps that may have appeared in terms of their learning and their experience in school. It will take a multi-agency, cross-sector approach to this. There is no silver bullet to answer. What we do need to develop, though, is better, more coherent structures in local ecosystems that can meet the needs of various students. I would say this, that's what the Elephant Group tries to do, establish an ecosystem in a region with university partners, third sector partners and schools. But specifically to your question around SEND, there's a lot of responsibility and accountability for local authority to support the work with schools and other institutions. So very complex, no silver bullet, but the structure, formats, ecosystems based in locality will have a big difference.
Thank you. And Sally, did your research find anything innovative on approaches for children with SEND and indeed autism?
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognise that the needs of all of these individual groups are going to be very different and specific, and also probably within that the individuals within those groups are kind of, they are people with names and faces. So I think that what we want to do is get that balance right between addressing those structural challenges that we need to overcome as institutions, in acknowledging that we don't necessarily have all the answers for a particular one individual in any one organisational programme, but in terms of kind of partnership working, that those solutions do or can exist. And I think that the other thing that to me would be really important there is in the referring back to our kind of board earlier discussion about looking at what has historically been tried and what works. There's, in terms of the localised programmes around very small groups, I think often we find that there is learning, but it hasn't necessarily been effectively shared, and really want to build on that best practice. So I know that there are interventions, for example, earlier someone from King's was speaking to me about mental health support and access and participation funding being used kind of, to look at mental health to support students in addressing their attainment. And I think we need to do much more kind of, joining up around those different solutions and programmes, as you said, Matt.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions from our online participants before I come back to the room?
Yep, we've got a couple here. So, firstly, what do schools actually want or need from higher education providers? And also, we've heard a lot today about schemes and had speakers from organisations that support access to highly selective universities. Does the panel have any good examples of attainment-raising activities from other kinds of higher education providers?
Great. So, John, I'm going to come to you first on what do schools want from higher education providers?
Yeah, I think, I believe in life you make your own luck. Education in Exeter is incredibly coherent. So the university, the college, the schools work together really closely. It's a real truism of that sort of, there's no such thing as an overnight success. So it started about 19 years ago when Sir Steve Smith went to the university and somebody who's now called Sir Richard Atkins went to the college. And we've worked very, very hard to create an ecosystem. So the first part of the answer to the question is for the university to play a real part in the ecosystem within the area that they're placed. And I think the next part of it is that each member of that ecosystem plays the part that they're meant to play and play that really effectively and proactively. And if you look at the impact of that, the one bit, and I thought it was a brilliant question just now, the one bit that probably hasn't structurally and strategically been analysed and supported in the way it should have been is the SEND agenda. And I think if we look across the Exeter ecosystem right now, there's a massive shortage of spaces for individuals who've got additional needs. And I think as a country, across governments, plural, we've not been brilliant at strategically planning what young people are accessing, nursery, primary, etc., and making changes and tweaks in the system. So I think the simple answer is for universities to really want to play a part in the ecosystem to make the place that they're in the best that it can be.
Great, thank you. And Sean, feel free to come in on both of those questions. So what schools want from HE and what the role is and the ask is of providers who aren't within that highly selective group.
Yeah, I think it might be useful if I sort of look at my own institution as a kind of a case study, if you like. Because the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts is a small specialist institution which very much trains students for, as the name suggests, the performing arts. But we took a decision about 8 years ago to start our own primary school. And then 2 years later, we started a sixth form. And then last year, we then had a significant change to the primary school, and now that is now becoming the LIPA primary and high school. So we now have the opportunity for a child in Toxteth in Liverpool to progress every step of their educational journey from age 4 all the way through to being awarded a degree in their in their early 20s. And I think that's in a sense what we began to see as what HE could do for schools, but also more importantly what it could do for its community as well. It bears the name Liverpool, therefore it should do something for Liverpool as well, was what we very much felt was the right thing for us to do, but also to make sure that we embedded creativity into the curriculum as well. So our entire curriculum is underpinned by being creative, by being evaluative, and looking at how that can sort of spread all the way through, so that we're not having to reverse engineer. When a student comes to us at 18, we have an opportunity to sort of fix into, if you like, that learning environment, a real respect for being creative, but also being collaborative as well. And so the attainment is not based upon do they remember or do they understand, it's based upon can they analyse and can they create, because we feel that those are the most important elements within the educational focus. And I think, again, going to the point as well about SEND as well, we have about 16% of our children in our primary school are categorised as SEND. And again, what we feel is the way in which we approach learning through music, through performance, through a very tactile curriculum. We feel again that provides options to support in a way that somehow the national curriculum doesn't always provide the, if you like, the scaffolding to be able to support a child's development where additional needs are required.
Thank you. And Matt, it would be remiss of me to not come to you on a question about what schools want from HE.
Yeah, so firstly, let me just say that it sounds like we're putting a lot on HE. School leaders up and down the country need to get more engaged in this outward-facing work. I have to say that from the get-go, because our experience of running the Elephant Group is that we've got a tranche of early adopters, but reaching out beyond that, it's becoming a challenge, or it is a challenge, and like I said earlier, for maybe the competing priorities around the recovery from COVID. But to John's point around collaboration, for me, I see 4 sort of levels of engagement. There's a kind of remote engagement where universities offer workshop visits, insights, days, and some online activity. Then there's a sustained engagement, which typically I would describe these as pre-designed by the university programs that they implement in schools. And this is the exciting bit for me, the strategic partnerships, where working collaboratively with universities, schools in a locality, design a program of events that and activities that they hope for the students to compete in, engage in. But the final part, which is, I think you was referring to here, John, which I use these words, so please feel free to change the title, a symbiotic association, where the resources are shared as people, systems, processes that can emerge, that can respond to the emerging trends or issues that arise in that locality. And that's where the exciting part comes, but it needs a change in mindset both from schools and universities to be flexible in their approach and to engage meaningfully locally.
Wonderful, thank you. We'll take 1 or 2 questions from in the audience, please. So we've got a gentleman at the front and then a lady in the middle.
Mike Nicholson, Director of Admissions at Cambridge and also an AQA exam board trustee. How much of the issue here is actually not the attainment but the assessment methods we use to assess the attainment? I'm thinking in particular in higher education context, we've had to adapt because of the pandemic. And what we've often seen is using different methods of assessment to the traditional ones we've used have improved the outcomes for particular groups of students, including students with recognised disabilities or where there are additional needs. And the challenge, I think, is we basically try and fit kids into a fairly narrow box in the GCSE and post-16 assessment in this country. And one of the challenges with that is if you can drill kids to pass an exam, it doesn't necessarily mean they're educated to then go on and do something with that qualification that they've been drilled to pass.
Thank you. And we'll take 1 more before coming to the panel. It's the lady in the middle, thank you.
Hi, Jessica Ster from Public First. We just heard from the panel what you want from universities in terms of working with schools. What do you not want? So what's not worked in the past? You know, what's a kind of poor approach to this going forward as the mission is for more partnerships? You know, what's not going to work from your perspective?
Thank you. I might flip those a bit and come to Sally first on that second question, but although feel free to come in on the first on assessment too. But again, from your research and your work at the moment, what do you think hasn't worked? What do you think we're wasting our time on?
Yeah, great question. I think when we look at partnership working, there's a whole lot of literature around partnership working, and it broadly divides into sort of 3 different areas. So material resources, kind of navigating through each other's systems and monitoring and evaluation, so kind of finding out what works and what doesn't. I think within that, some of the key challenges are what doesn't work is when you see that there's no shared aims, and we see that is a real challenge at the moment between the fact that schools are not driven by progression to HE data. So we do have destinations data, but now we're talking about this before. It is kind of becoming more integrated into the school's regulatory system, but if you ask schools what is the most important thing for them, it's GCSE attainment at GCSE. And so that mismatch of the different incentives, I think, is a real barrier. So what do we want to see? I think schools and universities finding shared aims would be a really important area to find, common ground on. I think monitoring and evaluation in order to build trust, because a really important part of partnership working is establishing that trust that what we're doing is working and is meaningful. So publishing what works and what doesn't, and articulating kind of why we're doing what we're doing. And I think finally, navigating through those systems. A lot of universities talk about it being really difficult to find who in schools is the person to talk to. And schools say a similar thing about universities, that who do you talk to and how do you get what you want? So I think what we want to see there is a conscious effort on both parts to try and understand and make that signposting clearer. And probably within that, I think there we need to kind of clarify who is doing what within the partnerships that we're forging.
Thank you. And Sean, a question about assessment methods there, and you talked a lot in your early answer about creativity being recognised. Do you think that assessment is potentially too narrow and inhibiting
I think
access?
Yeah, I do. I think a lot of assessment plays to the lowest common denominator in many respects. It's about very low-level thinking in terms of, it's about remembering, it's about regurgitating. It's not necessarily about analysing, evaluating and creating. And I think there's a sense in which we are then missing an enormous opportunity, I think, to really accelerate the development of children and students. And so I think that a lot of it's the binary nature of assessment at the moment, which I think is not actually developing children to be ready, if you like, for the next stage of their lives, whatever that may be. And so I think the more that we can, go back to the other question as well, about where higher education and schools, there is a sense, I think, in which there needs to be much more sort of joined up sort of thinking, but also we need to see that, I think, at central level as well, at government level. And so it's encouraging today to see more links perhaps with DFE, with Ofsted, with the OFS, so that there is this sort of strategic aim as well of allowing a degree of nuance into assessment as well, so that it's not this very, very rigid set of structures.
Thank you. And John, how do you see that working in a situation where we know that COVID has had an impact on learning, we know that it's had a bigger impact on disadvantaged pupils, and the gap has widened as a result of lack of access over the pandemic. What does that mean for how you think about access and admissions in your college?
Yeah, I think, just to sort of follow on from the point that was raised, I think my experience of students applying to high tariff universities is that, we've had this year about 20 students successfully apply to Oxford and Cambridge, but I think the thing that misses is that we don't get much feedback systematically about how we could, where it didn't quite work for the students who didn't get in, so we don't improve the system for state schools. It's almost like, it's a little bit like playing football and nobody analysing the game afterwards. So for me, there's a real missed opportunity, particularly for state providers, to get some feedback to say, look, this is where some of your guys missed, not specific, information that would break any confidences, but just for us to learn systematically so that next year more of our students that apply to Oxford and Cambridge are successful, and the year after more are successful. So I think that would be one point. I think the second one I totally agree with the challenge of COVID-19, and I think we've all seen that. And the thing I worry about actually most, just picking up at one of Sean's points, is I worry most about the wider social skills that young people have missed. And I've had the privilege of talking a little bit to the government about what we could do for catch-up. And my sort of passion is the things that sit outside the classroom. I'm less worried about maths and English. I'm more worried about mental health, social interaction, the ability to perform part of a team, the ability to get out on a river and work as a team. And I think those are the things that if we want to try and level up access, I think we need a real focus on that, the things that are softer skills, but are absolutely critical to thrive and survive at university.
Thank you. Before we come back to participant questions, Matt, just very briefly, I really like that question from, was it Jess at Public First? So in one or two bullets, what hasn't worked?
For me, it's just the mindset rather than any particular individual program. I think in different regions, different schools have different needs, and so some things will work in some schools versus in other, and vice versa. The most unhelpful thing that happens is that a project or a program is designed remotely, said, here, please deliver this, and there's no feedback loop and there's no iteration. So what we don't want is a fixed mindset. Yeah.
Really interesting, thank you. Do we have any more questions from our online audience? I can't remember who.
Here's a couple. Schools speak a lot about their successes in working with selective universities. Do the panel think they're channeling the same effort into encouraging learners to consider non-selective universities as options and considering them to be successes as well? And also, in more densely populated areas like London, how can institutions who are located close to each other adopt a joined-up approach so that offers of support to local schools aren't heavily concentrated on a select few?
Great, thank you. I think, Sally, we'll come to you first on that question on kind of how do universities that are in close proximity join up better?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. So I have sort of two different perspectives on this. My PhD research looks at schools in the northeast, which obviously has a much a more rural population, and then my work focuses in London, where we have over 40 HEIs in the capital. I think this is where partnership working has very different kind of needs and challenges. So at London Higher, we have our Access HE division works as part of Uni Connect. And I think that collaboration, not only, we often think of school-university partnerships, I think, as between a school and a university. And what is important is to say that actually that needs to be multiple universities speaking and collaborating and understanding the different needs of the area, and also across those different schools. I think Susie made a really good point earlier about kind of when we think about what we need to do, how we work with schools, finding school leaders, Matt is here today, and John, who are kind of already more literate in navigating universities and working in this space, and then dispersing that to schools. I think is it makes for a really joined up approach. But definitely, I think that's communication not only between schools and universities, but with each other, and that calls for things like Uni Connect. National collaborative programs, regional collaborative programs, and also that hyper-local sense. In London, we do have universities even within very local spaces who are occupying that same physical space, and collaboration there as well. So I think it comes down a lot to communication there.
And Matt, thank you. Is that your experience of being or running schools in London?
Well, so I'll talk from the perspective of the Open Group, and we've got some of our partner universities here who are very engaged locally, and we've got 2 tiers of meetings. There's that happen throughout the academic year. So there's like a program team meeting, which is the in-school lead who has the most contact with the students. They meet as a group of professionals from each school to share best practice, track students in their engagement in the program. And then the higher leverage meeting is what we call the program board meeting, where university-wide participation leads from Oxford, Exeter, etc., Sheffield, meet with the head teachers to share the learning that what's come out of the project team and to solve any issues that arise. So my experience has been that where you've got the structured support and engagement, where there's scheduled meetings, that the learning disproportionately happens in that space.
Thank you. And then, John, I'm going to come to you on the question about non-selective universities. What's your experience in your current role about supporting pupils to go to those kinds of universities?
I think, to be honest, if you look at the problem we're trying to solve, I think I worry less about that and more about students knowing that there are options in addition to university. So I think the apprenticeship offer that now exists, and I think the pressure that sometimes young people feel to go to university, whether they're naturally designed to do that or not, there's quite a lot of pressure, and I think we need to be much better as a society about what success looks like. And I think, success looks like getting a great job, having a great life, having a happy and healthy place to live. And I think that, so I would actually answer the question by saying I think we need to be much better at talking to all young people about the options that are in addition to going away for 3-year university programmes. We're quite unusual as a country that's our model. And actually, I think it was brilliant hearing from Princeton University earlier, where one of my students went to spend a year as part of their programme. That they actually have a very different model where lots of students start for 2 years close to home and then move further away. And for me, I think we need to be much better at careers guidance in its very fullest sense about all the options that exist. So it might be controversial in this audience, I don't worry about students knowing about all the range of universities because they seem to know that. I do worry about whether young people know that there are options in addition to higher technical qualifications that you can study locally, which I think we've got a real need for in UK PLC. So apologies if I've not fully answered that, but I've given you my take on that.
Can I just jump in there? That's a really interesting point about the alternatives, and to your point there, John, about the students and schools know a lot about accessing university. The challenge for the other route is that there's so much variance locally, regionally and nationally about the quality of the provider. And so developing a coherent local offer around that routing that is shared and known is going to be critical to the success of that pathway.
Great. We'll take more from the audience now. We have a gentleman at the very right, my right of the room, and then a gentleman here at the front.
Hi, Alex Blower, Arch University of Bournemouth, and this is the last question of the day, I promise. One of the things that I was particularly interested in is a lot of the time when we're talking about supporting schools and we're supporting attainment, we're talking about students who are probably already going to university, they just don't know which one yet. I know in our region, with boys' attainment on free school meals, 3 out of every 4 of those boys probably aren't going to get the level 2 qualifications that with new government policy mean higher education will even be an option. What I was interested in learning from the panel is what were your thoughts around higher education providers engaging with, say, level 2 students in FE colleges or with students in alternative provision pupil referral units? Is there a role for us to be playing there, and should we be focusing on that as much as those students that are probably already going to university, getting the grades to push them over the line for the highly selective institutions? Great question.
And got a gentleman just here.
Good afternoon. This question is I'm directing to Shelley, because you are representing 40 universities in London. I am the principal of one of the independent higher education institution, Icon College of Technology and Management. And our college is located in the London Borough of Tower Hamlet, a local authority. There are about 12 off-campus universities.
Sorry,
in
what
one building, off-campus university.
Right.
Campus is outside London. And in one building there are 3 universities. Another building there are 4 universities. In one room 2 universities. Another room 2 universities off campus. Do you think that these universities competing each other and whether they are recruiting right type of right standard of student or not? but they are maintaining the quality.
Because they have lots of different off-campus sites, is that?
In one borough.
In one borough?
London Borough of Toronto.
Okay.
I'm happy to be that.
East London.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
In one borough, this is somebody call it the university base or university local authority.
Thank you. So Sally, we'll come to you in a moment to pick that up, but first I want to come on to Alex's question and expand it a bit, because what I thought you were going to say, Alex, is should we be starting even earlier than secondary in terms of the role of universities and HC providers? We know that the gap is already over 18 months by the time children or young people do their GCSEs. And we know that almost half of that gap is already there by age 5. So Alex's question was, should there be a greater focus on universities supporting level 2 students in FE and in alternative provision, for example? I'm going to supplement that with, should there be an even greater focus in primary, maybe even the early years? Sean, I'm going to come to you because I was really interested in your age 4 to 20-something model.
Yeah, indeed. And I think we're probably the only performing and creative arts institution in the United Kingdom that currently does this. And it was precisely about providing us with the ability to, as I said earlier, in terms of within the community. And when you consider that, of course, a lot of higher education institutions, by virtue of, from a financial perspective, but also in terms of from their reputational perspective, often look out and beyond the locality where they're based. And so, the drive into China, for example, the increasing focus upon international students, particularly to augment static tuition fees and things like that, makes it a very, very challenging environment, both within a local context, but also within a viability context as well for HE providers as funding becomes, as it effectively contracts. And so if you like, the emphasis then upon HEs to make these interventions into FE, whilst I think, it's something which my own institution, of course, does by virtue of the fact that we have a learning group, as Natalie says, running from age 4 all the way through to higher level degrees. It's still, I think, an incredibly challenging set of, objectives for HE to be almost given the, if you like, the responsibility to a degree of, and as we're seeing with government funding at the moment, particularly post-Augar, looking at probably going more into, reassigning, redeploying funding into further education. That seems to me a logical thing to be doing. But at the same time, I think it is about, going back to probably my first answer this afternoon, I think it's about trying to find that holistic sort of framework, and I think it's about trying to establish within a local context. And I think I don't have any evidence for this at the moment, but I'm beginning to see this in terms of applications, certainly to my own institution at higher education, is that students, particularly our sixth form students, are opting to not go and study too far away from where they live, and maybe this is a post-pandemic. The causality may be due to that, and so I think there is going to be more focus on localism, and that sort of intersecting with partners within further education, but also be below that as well. And I think that's a very I think everybody wins through that, but of course it has to be properly funded, and it has to be something which is not done in an informal or an expectant way. I think it has to be done in a very targeted and a very structured way.
Thank you. And John?
Yeah, I think that my answer to that would be to get involved in school governance and in making a real difference to the school in that way. So if I give you the extra example, several years ago there was a National Challenge School, for those of you old enough to remember that, and the university and the college were asked to get involved in the leadership of that school to form a trust. That school for 2 years running was in the top 10 fastest improving schools in the country, and from that the Ted Ragg Modi Academy Trust was born, which the university and the college run together, and I think that has made a much bigger difference to the school ecosystem in Exeter across primary and secondary than sort of a short-term intervention. So I think that sort of strategic involvement, that strategic challenge is where universities can make a massive difference to place, and by doing that you make a massive difference to all of the students in that school, not just maybe the ones who aren't quite there with their maths and English. But Matt might have more comments on that, I don't know.
I'll come to you quickly, Matt, and then back to Sally.
Well, I'm blessed. I work for a large MAT ARC, and we have our own research and development team. And I think your point there about universities adding capacity to smaller trusts of 3 or 4 schools to be that research and development group that strategically help them with the interventions would be add power to the schools.
Yeah, and we do have models where university are the MAT.
Yes.
I think Chichester is one
That's
that
right.
I'm familiar with. Sally, over to you for the question we had about Tower Hamlets.
Yeah, so I mean, lots of universities across the UK have branch campuses. That's not just in London, but they are part of the sort of the diversity of London HE. They're all regulated by the OFS, so I think this more probably comes down to student choice and supporting students to navigate what is a complicated HE sector to make sure they're making the best decisions for them. And so I think that in terms of kind of bringing this back to how can we support schools, I think that is making sure that we're communicating really clearly what those decisions are that pupils can make. And when we're working in partnership with schools and universities locally, kind of bringing in the full ecosystem, I guess, of London HE. And just quickly on the first question about raising attainment, I think that Neil Harrison has some really interesting work on this on possible selves, which the kind of in a nutshell, hope he doesn't mind me saying this, is start young, keep going. So introduce HE at an early age alongside a raft of other options and support pupils consistently and coherently throughout that time. So there's no point starting young and then stopping, but there's equally no point in starting this too late. We need pupils to know that it is possible for them to go to university and support them breaking down those structural barriers to get them there.
Brilliant, thank you. We'll take 1 or 2 more from the gallery, if that's okay, if we have any. You never know who I'm looking at for voice.
A couple of questions from us. Is raising attainment and expectation of young people going to be successful without also offering the resources that might be needed to plug the gap in for those young people? So Princeton seemed to acknowledge this as a key issue. Interested in what the panel think about offering of additional resources as well as attainment support. And second question, can the panel give any examples of where a school has initiated an attainment raising partnership with a higher education provider?
Great. Sean, I'll come to you first about resourcing, if that's okay.
So, sorry, can you remind me the question?
So I think the question is that there's a lot of focus on improving attainment and working collaboratively, but little focus on actually do young people have the means to access university?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And again, because looking at it, in the sort of the microcosm of my own institution, we have a very holistic approach to this. But I know that that's not necessarily something which is commonplace throughout the sector. And I think it is very much at the moment. I think there is, whilst there are whilst there is funding available for this additional work, I don't think it's never sufficient. But also, again, going back to improved science, I don't think it's targeted as well. I think that there's a sense in which there's something not quite coming together in terms of that framework, in terms of driving forward these initiatives. So yes, but additional resourcing is absolutely essential. But I'm not sure that's going to happen anytime soon. Reading the mood music that we're seeing coming out of the government at the moment.
Thank you. And Sally, can I come to you for that second question about examples of initiatives that have been driven by schools?
Yeah, for sure. So probably important to say that obviously the schools in my research have not given permission for their names to be shared publicly. So there's lots of examples that I could give you and sort of anonymised examples, but two that I can think of that definitely kind of are high profile enough to be able to share in the Northeast is firstly Southmore Academy in Sunderland. Deputy head is Sammy Wright and the woman spearheading it is Claire Ungley. Do a huge amount of work around raising attainment and university progression across the Northeast from a school-focused perspective. They have a programme from year 4 to year 13, and they work with their primary schools in the cluster. They work with schools across the Northeast, and they work with Northeast universities and also with Oxbridge. So that's a really good example. And another one would be Emma Maslin at Dyke House, who's also got a kind of a Raising Aspirations a programme probably about 10 years ago when kind of aspiration raising was the trendy thing that has now moved over to much more of a focus on kind of progression and attainment raising. So it'd be my two examples there.
Really helpful. We'll take one or two final questions from the audience if that's okay. Can you let me know if you have one? Okay, do we have any more online questions?
Are there any particular things that providers might need to consider as they weigh up what age group or key stage of pupils to engage with? And feedback from head teachers is that we should focus on progress made, not GCSE results. Are we perhaps in danger of focusing too narrowly on absolute attainment?
Yeah, so picking up similar themes about where the optimal kind of intervention window is and whether there should be a wider focus beyond just attainment. Any members of the panel like to pick up on those or indeed build on the question that Sally answered about examples of school-led practice?
So just briefly on the when to intervene, there's a couple of issues here. Firstly, that if we're going to have systemic change, then it does need to start earlier. The engagement needs to be prolonged and sustained. However, the last time I looked, 2019, there were about 25,000 students nationally who achieved the grades good enough to go to a selective university, but didn't actually access a selective university from non-selective state schools. So that's why the Elephant Group, we started at year 12 because we know that they've got the potential already, and we just want to make sure that they do secure those places. So it's not an either or, it's both, but be really specific and targeted with your intervention based on your locality.
Great, thank you. And does anyone want to come back on the kind of how universities should be looking at access or indeed the age groups?
I don't want to dominate it, so I've got one point on sort of progress, and it leads into sort of contextual offers. And I was struck when I read there's a report out from the Sutton Group back in 2017 that 1 in 5 students from the areas which has high succession rates got into the top university with the average grade or below BBC. And so the issue there is that we have got contextual offers, but it would seem to me for the wrong groups of students instead of targeting. So if we can design analysis and use data effectively to say, well, actually, because of the context of this young person, because of the school that they've come from and the typical attainment in that area, actually they've got potential. I think we could broaden the access to top universities, but I recognise that's a sophisticated and challenging objective, but it's something we need to work on.
Thank you. And Sally mentioned the point earlier about there being a lack of direct incentive on schools in terms of destinations and progress, and she talked about the fact that we do have destinations measures, but it's not the primary focus of schools. And John, do you think that needs to change in any way?
I think my experience actually now is that it is changing. I think that the new Ofsted, Amanda might have talked about this morning, but I think the new Ofsted methodology is much more looking at an individual course, programme, curriculum area. Is that actually doing what it is meant to do for the young people that study within that, and looking at the totality of it? So I think we have started to move in that direction. And then just if I can add one comment about resources from earlier. I'm always taken by, there might be newer research now, so I don't pretend to be a research guru, so I fear Sally staring at me. But I think it was Hattie from New Zealand did some research about the biggest factors that have the biggest impact on how well young people do within a school environment. And not unsurprisingly, 50% was down to the young person themselves, motivation, how hard they work, etc., etc. But the next biggest determinant was the teacher. 30% of how that young person did was the teacher. And I'm always taken by how little we really talk about the teacher, the passion of teaching, quality of teaching and learning across our education system. And I think, that I think is something that if we really got that right, so that being a teacher was the top job that you could possibly get in the country, wow, what a country we would live in. So thank you.
Can't argue with that. Any final points from the panel? Anything that you've been itching to say or point that you've been wanting to get across that you haven't? Not even from Matt. Great. Well, with that in mind, we've almost come to the end of our hour anyway. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panellists, Sally, John, Matt and Sean. Really appreciate your time. John, back over to you.
So, thank you very much. Another fantastic panel. You can make your way down if you wish. And this is now nearly the end, and in a minute you get to go out and have some tea, which we have prepared for you, and then when tea is over, I believe there are a number of reputable public houses nearby. But in order to get to the tea, you have to listen to me talk again, because I haven't done that enough today. There are a few things I just wanted to say, just to summarise what we've seen today and to thank those involved. I think the first thing to say is to reiterate that those of you who are interested in the data and information that we've quoted today from the OFS will find the QR code on your paper, and you can follow through to that to the insight brief, and that will also provide the underlying data that sits behind it and an analysis brief on that. We've also updated the schools pages on the OFS website, which talks about the work that providers can do with schools to provide some of the more recent concrete examples that I know people are keen to see. Before I summarise a bit about what I think we discussed today, I just want to say an enormous thank you to the audience, both here and online. It's fantastic to have had so many of you here and to have had such rich and thoughtful questions coming from the audience. I'm enormously grateful to the speakers, who've all given up their time and energy, and I think have led us through some really fascinating and thoughtful and thought-provoking ideas. I'm very, very grateful to the staff of the OFS, who you will have seen around today, who have worked incredibly hard to put this event together. And in particular, I want to thank Abigail, who is now still hiding in the back, but who has led the construction of the event with incredible skill and verve. And I think a hybrid event as our first piece on returning from the world of COVID. I think this has been an enormous success, and I'm very, very grateful to her. So if we could have a round of applause for our staff and things. Thank you. So before I finish, I just wanted to run through, I think, some of the things we've learned. So I think from Greg Burke this morning, who talked, I think, very well about the importance of approaching the challenges with schools with an open and inquisitive mind and being really deliberate about where providers can add value. I think Amanda impressed on us the pressures that schools face and the need for higher education providers to think creatively in offering solutions and support. Our evaluation panel suggested the need to use the full plethora of data and insight and evaluation, and that concept of intermediate and long-term outcomes, which I hope our colleagues at TASO are going to take forward for us, and I hope to see some more people there when we discuss that. I think our colleagues from Princeton provided us with an example of a remarkably focused intervention and its enduring effects and power. and our most recent panel has made it clear the interlocking complexity of our education system, and particularly the need for multi-agency work, which goes beyond the challenge that we've laid down for from the OFS to our providers, but is an essential context to it. But I think what struck me most today is that we've come back and back and back again to the question of aspiration. What is it? Who has it? What should they have it for? Should we be seeking to change it? And I think I was struck powerfully by Susie Wigham's use of the term self-efficacy. And it seems to me that that is ultimately the aim. We are in search of the tools, skills, and courses that will allow our students to be the authors of their own lives. And it is not for us to judge the size of our students' dreams. It is not for us to determine that we know best what is for them. But we must ensure that they believe that there is nothing that is beyond their power. But we can't just say that as a pious hope or as a sort of triumphal bit of cheerleading for ourselves. We have to make sure that the barriers that prevent them from doing the things that they want to do and believing they can achieve all they can, those barriers disappear. And I know from the conversations that I've had before today, online, that many people are conscious of the wider barriers that exist for the students from disadvantaged backgrounds in accessing higher and succeeding in higher education. And I do understand and acknowledge that. Attainment isn't everything. We have been clear about that. But we also have to think very carefully about the work that we can do, the most effective work we can do as a sector collectively, what is in our power now, and what if we act together, collaboratively, consistently and persistently, what will be in our power in future. And I think it is that sense of unity, hard work, dedication over time, and a willingness to experiment, to discover what works and what can work better, that will allow us to do this work and achieve for the students we are all here to serve. Thank you very much.